Okay, we're ready to go. We are now reconvened in open session. We will now consider action on closed session items. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I move to renew and award probationary employment contracts to specified non-certified employees for the 2019-20 contract year as presented under separate cover.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote.
In favor.
For those, yes. For those who are in favor, please vote. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. James, you can vote by show of hand. I'm sorry.
That's okay, got it.
Mr. Rice.
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Trustees propose to non-renew the term employment contract of Diane Wright, and that the Board use the process prescribed by Texas Education Code, Chapter 21, Subchapter F, and direct the superintendent to provide notice of the Board's action as required by law.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote.
We can't see it.
Other hand? There we go.
I'm in favor.
All right. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Rice, do you have another motion? Okay. Mrs. Helliger.
I move that the Board of Trustees propose to non-renew the term employment contract of Marcus Castile, and that the Board hear any requested non-renewal hearing and direct the superintendent to provide notice of the Board's action as required by law.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Helliger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Someone.
Mrs. James, your hand is not in the frame. Can you put
I
it closer
could
to
see
your
it
head?
there.
There you go.
I could see your thumb. Everyone, please vote. It's not registering.
Sorry.
Norma? Everyone push your button, begin.
Show of hands.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Moving on, Mrs. Helliger.
I move the Board of Trustees terminate the probationary employment contract of Gabriel Caravello at the end of the contract period in the best interest of the district, and direct the superintendent to provide notice of the Board's action as required by law.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Helliger and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Please vote show of hand. Or there we go. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Helliger, is that it?
That's all I have.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, sir. I move to renew and award term employment contracts to specified certified employees for the 2019-2020 contract year as presented under separate cover.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rosenthal and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Rosenthal.
I move that the Board of Trustees appoint LaToya Garrett to the position of elementary principal.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rosenthal and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Tossan.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I move to renew and award term non-Chapter 21 contracts to specified certified employees for the 2019-20 contract year as presented under separate cover.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Tossan and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Tossian.
I move to renew and award probationary employment contracts to specified certified employees for the 2019-20 contract year as presented under separate cover.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Tossian and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Tossian.
I move that the board approve the proposed settlement in cause number 418-CV-00626, Wayne Thomas versus Fort Bend ISD, pending in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas as presented, and authorize the superintendent or his designee to execute the settlement documents.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Tossian and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to our board member reports. First up is our activity report, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, sir. This month, board members were present at TASA Facilities Committee meetings, Fort Bend ISD Special Education Parent Advisory Council meeting, Internal Audit Committee meeting, elementary school leadership conferences at Ridgepoint and Dulles High School, NSBA Annual Conference in Philadelphia, and TASB Spring Board meeting in Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Next, we have our special reports. Mrs. James, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I would like to give a special report update on the Go Public Gulf Coast effort. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person to give it to you. It's not possible for me to be there, so thank you for letting me Skype in tonight. I wanted to give you an update. The organization's been, that we're a member of, has been very busy. We're up to about 20 member districts. We also have about 5 businesses and organizations that have joined. We're right now in the middle of planning our annual meeting, which will be next month, May 15th. And so we will send representative, I'll be there, and hopefully we'll be able to have an administrator there as well. The nominating committee is meeting later this week to choose the steering committee, and we're actually going to host that meeting here in our district office. And I've been on the steering committee, as you may know, for the past year, well, 2 years, and so I may possibly continue on that. Another thing that the organization's been working really hard on is our marketing program, and I'd like to let Mrs. Sofar give you a little bit of an update about the marketing program.
Very good. One of the things that we've been working on in our Gold Public Gulf Coast group is a media buy with Channel 2. It's actually in conjunction with Houston Life Show. It's a segment called Cool Schools, and so all of the partnering districts are working together to provide material, B-roll footage, and this program will include TV segments, commercials, social media amplification, and a voting contest. And you, in your daily report, one of the first items today was the link on how to vote, so that school districts are encouraging their communities to log on to their social media and vote for them. Fort Bend ISD, we posted on our social media starting today action buttons to encourage people to come and vote for Fort Bend ISD for Cool Schools. The campaign the contest will actually go through April 28th. And so you'll start noticing some of our neighboring districts competing for that same competition. So we're very excited about that. We've included the message in our internal links as well as our external links, put it in our principal newsletter, and we'll continue to send that out in the next week or so. So you'll be seeing several emails and encourage staff to use the hashtags that we've developed with Go Public.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to add on. So I just want you to know that the 3 largest districts in Fort Bend County are part of this: ourselves, Lamar Consolidated as well as Meadville. So I'm very happy about the networking we've done between our districts, but also, you know, I kind of want to keep that going. So and as you also may know, the organization is open to all the school districts in Region 4, and we're continuing to grow. And I think it's beneficial to share the positive message about what's going on in our public schools. So I guess I want to just know from the board, and maybe this, should we, you know, I guess we needed to kind of know if we want to continue to participate. It involves paying dues, and it involves some of my time. So, but others could volunteer and take our spot. But if you take my spot, but I just wanted you to know, I just want to kind of get a feel for people's feeling on that.
Do we have any discussion about that?
Yeah, I just say I think this is a very worthy cause for us to continue to do this, and we appreciate you serving for us and representing our district, and I would love for you to continue to do this work.
I agree. Mr. Rice, did you want to say anything about it?
Your spot is safe, Grill.
I'll ditto to both of those. I appreciate it too. I don't want your spot. Thank you for serving. We appreciate you.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're actually saying better you than me. I get that. Okay. I will carry on then, and I will update you and let you know what happens after the annual meeting, and I'll be giving you a report again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, I would like to report on the elementary school leadership conferences that have taken place over the last 2 weekends. This is put on by the school leadership group, Mike Madden and Dexter. And I will say that it was, both of those were amazing. So 2 weeks ago, 2 Saturdays ago, we had all the feeder patterns from Ridgepoint, Willow Ridge, Hightower, and so all those elementary schools, they had well over 150 kids attend, and these were 4th and 5th graders that were chosen for their leadership potential. And it was truly an amazing program. Kristen and I got to speak to the kids and interact a little bit. And this past weekend it was held at Dulles Middle School for more of the centrally located high school feeder patterns. And same thing, it's just these kids they already know much of the profile of a graduate, and it was really impressive. And it was the work that especially the Leadership 101 and Leadership 102 kids were doing, because they were kind of the ones that were, you know, leading the kids around and leading the program. It was really awesome. And after I got to speak to them this Saturday, I had 191 elementary school students sing happy birthday to me. So it was pretty cool.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. We appreciate you attending that. It's good stuff. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. In my capacity serving on the TASB Board of Directors, I'm chairing the Legislative Committee this year. And every Monday we have a conference call from 11 to 12. And a couple of things I'd just like to report on is that although there's been a lot of talk about the various House and Senate bills to infuse new cash into public education, they also have to find a replacement revenue stream. So there has been some talk of increasing the state sales tax from 6.25% to 7.25%, although that's met with some resistance because it's seen as a regressive tax. Stay tuned. Another thing of interest, there have been over 7,000 bills filed, and so the TASB GR staff combs through every one. But one of interest that we talked about today is House Bill 233, which would require a uniform start date, the 3rd Monday in August for all districts of innovation and charter schools, and non-districts of innovation and non-charter schools would be the 4th Monday in August. And something I think that was mentioned earlier is that they're looking at the property tax revenue cap of 2.5% for school districts and 3.5% for cities and counties. So we'll see how that goes. Actually, I found between Mr. Bassett and Ms. Sofer quite up to date and timely, just as timely, if maybe more timely than mine. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mrs. Tossan.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I was going to be giving an update on some new developments in special education with the legislature, and also let the board know that in my capacity as legislative liaison and board member in Fort Bend ISD, as well as chair of the Continuing Advisory Committee for Special Education, to which I was appointed to by the governor, I attended a press conference last week to call on the legislature to do something about special education funding. Many of you may have read in the newspaper in the last couple of weeks that the TEA, the state of Texas, has been found guilty of not complying with federal law by not maintaining the amount of funds into special education from year over year. The federal law says that we have to maintain that level of funding year over year in order to be eligible for federal grants. Texas has failed to do that at least, I think we're up to 4 years now. 2012, Dina probably knows better than me, 2016, 2017, and 2018. So originally the federal court said, Texas, you're in violation. You're probably going to have to pay back the federal government about $33 million. That estimate is now over $200 million, $111 million of which comes just from this year. So they have until, I think, June of this year to either spend that money, or we'll have to be paying it back to the federal government. Because of that, some representatives on both sides of the aisle and several leaders in advocacy organizations and myself showed up to this press conference. I was asked to speak, and I talked about the funding gaps that we have here in Fort Bend ISD and how this is going to make it even more difficult for us to fund special education, and calling on legislators to please do something about it this session. I also had the opportunity to meet with Chairman Zerwas, who's chair of appropriations, and was appointed as a conferee to the conference committee, which will negotiate the final budget between the House and the Senate. He was gracious enough to take a meeting with me and definitely understands the issues, and was very positive about seeing what they could work out for us, because really we're in crisis in the state of Texas when it comes to special education. We have a philosophy problem, but which is, I think, what we're seeing and how we identify kids and how we fund this. Unfortunately, less than 3 hours after that press conference, I was contacted by the governor's office and told that I was going to be replaced on the Continuing Advisory Committee for Special Education. And so I'll let everyone draw their own conclusions about that. But I have no regrets about going and standing up for kids who really have no voice and have not been listened to in the state of Texas, my daughter being one of them, and to stand up for this district and the needs that we face currently and will be facing in the future. So I'm asking everyone on this board and everyone on this room and everyone who can hear to please call your legislator and tell them that we need something done this session, or we're going to have a real continuing crisis on our hands in being able to educate kids with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. We appreciate that. I'm going to give our final report this evening on it's our board training report. And we have 3 different tiers. First is our local district orientation and the Texas Education Code orientation or update. We currently do not have any first-year board members, but the first-year board member requirement, local district orientation, and 3 hours of Texas Education Code orientation. We do have experienced board members, and the Texas Education Code update following each legislative session. All Fort Bend ISD trustees have met Tier 1 requirements. Tier 2 is team building and assessment. The requirement is a minimum of 3 hours annually. All Fort Bend ISD trustees have met this requirement. The last is the Tier 3, the continuing education and assessed needs. First-year board member requirement is a minimum of 10 hours of continuing education. Experienced board member requirement is a minimum of 5 hours. As of April 15th, 2019, all Fort Bend IS trustees have exceeded Tier 3 requirements. That is it for that update. We will now move on to our consent agenda. May I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda items 11A through D in their entirety.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Haliger. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Next on our agenda is the action items, which we do not have any. So we will move on to our review the future board meeting agenda items. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. We've got an action-packed May and June coming up. We're going to be giving an update on the Student Health Advisory Committee year-end and the work they've done this year, as well as the strategic planning update and community-based accountability system framework update in May, along with several policies, transportation hazardous routes, and then we'll ask you to approve the district-developed curriculum related to the Sugar Land 95. The audit committee will also be presenting internal audit risk assessment of the long-range internal audit plan in May. At least that's what we're planning toward at this point. In June, we're going to give a Gifted and Talented Task Force update, as well as a bond program update, including an overview of the new dashboard that's been set up on our website to monitor in a transparent way. We're also going to adopt a budget in June, so you're going to expect budget updates in May as well, along with further discussion about a possible TRE, as well as a few policies in June. A little further out, when we get to July and cruising into August, we're looking at special education updates, as well as an update on the Early Literacy Center and the Early Intervention Academy first year.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, Mrs. James. Have a great evening.